The glass shattered before she even saw him fall. Hilda spun around just in time to see the tall stranger in the charcoal suit crash into the table behind him, his hand clutching his chest, his face draining of color in seconds. The restaurant froze. Cutlery stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. And there was Hilda, tray still balanced on her palm, the only one moving as she rushed toward a man she had never met, a man whose face would soon be plastered across every business magazine in the country. Sir, can you hear me?" she said, dropping to her knees beside him, ignoring the murmurs rippling through the restaurant. Her manager was already yelling for someone to call an ambulance, but Hilda didn't wait. She loosened his tie with trembling fingers, checked his breathing, tilted his head back the way she'd learned from a first aid class she almost didn't attend 2 years ago. She never imagined it would matter. She never imagined any of this would matter. His eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused, and locked onto hers. "Don't let them," he rasped before his eyes rolled back again. If you're loving the suspense already, hit that subscribe button now and turn on notifications, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't see coming. Drop a like and comment where you're watching from. Let's make this the biggest one yet. By the time the paramedics arrived, the entire restaurant had gathered in a loose, murmuring circle, phones out, whispering his name. Kong Junho, CEO of Kong Industries. One of the richest men in Asia, 34 years old, unmarried, notoriously private, notoriously ruthless in boardrooms, and notoriously invisible outside of them. Nobody knew why a man like that was eating alone in a modest restaurant in a quiet corner of the city, especially not one that served soul food alongside Korean classics, run by a stubborn, warm-hearted woman named Miss Dorothy, who had built the place from nothing but grit and a dream. Hilda didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that a man had collapsed in front of her, and something in his eyes when he looked at her, something desperate, something afraid, had reached into her chest and refused to let go. The paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him past her, something slipped from his jacket pocket and skittered across the floor, landing near the leg of a chair. A small velvet box, worn at the edges, the kind that had clearly been carried for a long time, opened and closed 1,000 times by anxious hands. Nobody else saw it fall. The restaurant's attention was on the stretcher, on the sirens outside, on the shock of a billionaire collapsing in their midst. Hilda bent down and picked it up before she even thought about what she was doing. Inside was a ring. Not flashy, not covered in diamonds the size of her thumbnail, like she might have expected from a man worth billions. It was delicate, an antique gold band with a single sapphire stone, the kind of ring that told a story rather than a price tag. Tucked beside it, folded so many times the creases had gone soft, was a photograph. A woman, elegant, smiling, holding a baby. On the back, in careful handwriting, were words in Korean that Hilda couldn't read. Her manager called her name sharply. "Hilda." "Back to work. The ambulance is gone. Customers are still waiting." She closed her fist around the box and slipped it into her apron pocket, her heart hammering. She told herself she'd hand it to the restaurant's lost and found. She told herself someone from his company would call asking about it. She told herself a lot of things that night, lying on her thin mattress in her small studio apartment on the edge of the city, staring at the ceiling, the little velvet box sitting on the table beside her like it was watching her. She was 26 years old, a young black woman who had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, the oldest of 3, raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night to keep food on the table. Hilda had dreamed of culinary school once, dreamed of owning her own kitchen someday, but life had handed her bills instead of scholarships, and she'd been waiting tables to survive ever since her mother's health started failing. She sent almost every paycheck home to help with her mother's medication. She hadn't bought herself new shoes in over a year. And here she was, holding what was probably worth more than her entire life savings, and all she could think about was the fear in that man's eyes. "Don't let them," he had said. "Don't let them what?" She turned the little photograph over and over in her hands, tracing the woman's smile, wondering who she was to him. A mother. A wife. Someone he had lost. The ache on his face when he collapsed hadn't been about pain in his chest, or not only that. It had been about something deeper, something that lived under his ribs long before tonight. The next morning, the news exploded. Kang Junho, hospitalized after collapsing from what doctors were calling severe cardiac stress brought on by exhaustion and, more alarmingly, a family emergency involving a hostile takeover attempt on Kong Industries led by his estranged uncle. The article Hilda read on a cracked phone screen during her 15-minute break said he was recovering but under strict medical supervision, and that his assistant had been searching frantically for an item of profound personal significance that had gone missing from the scene. Her stomach dropped. She should have turned it in immediately. She knew that. But something about the article's cold, corporate phrasing item of profound personal significance bothered her. It wasn't a Rolex. It wasn't corporate documents. It was a ring and a photograph of a woman who was clearly no longer in his life, tucked away like a secret he carried against his heart. She decided she would return it herself. Not to an assistant, not to a company office where it might get lost in paperwork or, worse, stolen by someone with less conscience than her. She would find a way to give it back to him directly. She had no idea that decision would change the entire trajectory of her life and his. If you want to see how a poor waitress ends up standing face to face with one of the most powerful men in the world, don't go anywhere. Like this video, drop a comment telling me if you think Hilda should return the ring in person, and subscribe. 3 days passed before Hilda summoned the courage to act. Kong Industries' headquarters was a glass tower that seemed to pierce the clouds themselves, nothing like the modest restaurant where she spent 12 hours a day on her feet. She stood across the street in her only decent coat, clutching the velvet box in her coat pocket, watching security guards in dark suits usher important-looking people through revolving doors, and she almost turned back 3 times. But she thought of his eyes. Don't let them. Whatever that meant, it had mattered enough for a man of his power to say it with his last conscious breath before collapsing. She owed it to him, to whoever that woman in the photo was, to make sure it reached his hands and no one else's. She walked in. The receptionist took one look at her second-hand coat, her worn shoes, and the nervous way she clutched her bag, and her expression shifted into something practiced and dismissive. Do you have an appointment? No, but I have something that belongs to Mr. Kong. Something he lost. It's very important. The receptionist's smile didn't reach her eyes. You can leave it with security. I'll make sure it's logged. I need to give it to him myself. That's not possible. Mr. Kong isn't taking meetings. He's not even in the building. Hilda's fingers tightened around the box in her pocket. Please. It's a small velvet box. There's a ring inside and a photograph. I think it means something to him. More than money. I don't want it disappearing into a lost and found bin somewhere. Something in her voice made the receptionist pause. For a moment, the polished mask slipped, and Hilda saw a flicker of genuine curiosity. Wait here. 20 minutes later, a man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes appeared, introducing himself as Secretary Park, Mr. Kang's most senior assistant. His gaze swept over Hilda with the same dismissiveness the receptionist had shown, but when she pulled the velvet box halfway from her pocket, just enough for him to see the edge of it, his entire posture changed. "Where did you find this?" he said, no longer a question, his voice tight. "At the restaurant." It fell out of his pocket when the paramedics were carrying him out. "I picked it up. I've kept it safe." Secretary Park stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face: relief, suspicion, disbelief, maybe all 3 tangled together. "Do you understand what that ring is?" "No," Hilda admitted. "But I understand it matters. That's enough for me." He was quiet for a moment before he spoke again, his voice lower now. "That ring belonged to Mr. Kang's mother. She died when he was 9 years old. He has carried it every single day since he was old enough to keep it on his person. If it had gone missing permanently, I don't think you understand what that would have done to him." Hilda felt her throat tighten. She thought of her own mother, of the small gold cross her mother had given her, the one thing she'd never remove even if someone offered her a fortune for it. "Then I'm even more glad I came myself," she said quietly. "Please, let me give it to him." Secretary Park studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened, just slightly, just enough. "Follow me," he said. "If your heart is already racing, imagine what's coming when Hilda finally comes face to face with Junho." Smash that like button, subscribe. Secretary Park led Hilda through a maze of hallways that seemed to grow quieter and more expensive with every turn, until they reached a private elevator that required a keycard just to summon. Hilda's heart pounded as the doors slid shut, sealing her inside with a man who worked for one of the richest people alive. "He's not receiving visitors," Park said, almost to himself, as if reminding her of the rules even as he broke them. "But I think he'd want to see this returned in person. He would want to know who found it." "Is he okay?" Hilda asked. The article said cardiac stress. Park's jaw tightened. "He works himself past exhaustion. Has for years. His uncle has been trying to force him out of the company his own father built, spreading lies to the board, turning family members against him one by one. Mr. King hasn't slept more than 4 hours a night in months. His body finally forced him to stop." Hilda swallowed. She thought about how easy it was to look at a man like Kang Junho and imagine his life was nothing but comfort and ease. She hadn't imagined exhaustion. She hadn't imagined loneliness. The elevator opened onto a private floor, hushed and dim, with the particular stillness of a place built for recovery, not business. A private medical suite, more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital room, but with monitors quietly beeping beside the bed. Kang Junho was sitting upright against a stack of pillows, pale, and 4-line taped to the back of his hand, staring blankly at the window as though the city outside belonged to someone else's life. He looked younger than his photos, Hilda thought. Younger and infinitely more tired. "Sir," Park said gently. "There's someone here who has something of yours." Junho turned his head slowly, his eyes finding Hilda in the doorway, and for a moment, nothing in his expression moved. Then his gaze dropped to her hand, to the small velvet box she was holding out with trembling fingers, and something cracked open in his face. "You," he breathed. "You were the one at the restaurant." "Yes," Hilda said softly, stepping closer, setting the box gently on the blanket beside him rather than forcing it into his hands. "It fell out of your pocket. I didn't want it to get lost. I know it means something to you." Junho stared at the box like it was something sacred, his hand hovering over it before he finally opened it, revealing the ring and the folded photograph inside. His breath caught audibly. For a long moment, he said nothing, just ran his thumb over the edge of the photograph, over his mother's smiling face, his composure cracking at the seams. "I thought I'd lost her," he whispered. Again. The room went silent except for the soft beeping of the monitor. Hilda didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, letting him have the moment. "Do you know how many people walked past me collapsed on that floor before you got to me?" he finally asked, his voice rough. "Phone's out. Recording. Nobody moved to help until you did." "I just did what anyone should have done," Hilda said. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You did what almost no one does anymore." He looked up at her fully then, his dark eyes searching her face like he was trying to memorize it. "What's your name?" "Hilda." "Hilda." He repeated it like he was testing the shape of it. "Thank you, Hilda. You have no idea what you've given back to me." If this moment hit you in the chest the way it hit us writing it, smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do so, because things are about to get a lot more complicated for Hilda and Junho. Secretary Park cleared his throat, glancing at his watch. "Sir, you should rest." The doctors were very clear. In a moment, Junho said, not taking his eyes off Hilda. "Please. Sit. Just for a few minutes." Park hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and his employer's rare, direct request, before finally stepping back toward the door, giving them a measure of privacy. Hilda sat carefully in the chair beside the bed, painfully aware of how out of place she must look in her worn coat and scuffed shoes, next to a man whose watch alone probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. "You work at the restaurant," Junho said. "How long?" "Almost 2 years now. I wait tables, help in the kitchen when they're short-staffed." It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Most of them anyway. Why that restaurant? It's small. There are bigger, more prestigious places. Hilda allowed herself a small, tired smile. Miss Dorothy, who owns it, gave me a chance when nobody else would. I needed steady work fast. My mother was sick, and most places wanted references I didn't have or experience I hadn't built yet. Miss Dorothy just looked at me and said, "Baby, can you carry a tray without dropping it?" I said yes. She hired me on the spot. Something in Junho's expression shifted, softened further. She sounds like a good woman. She is. She built that place from nothing. Started with a food truck, saved every dollar for 6 years before she could afford the storefront. She always says the restaurant isn't just about food, it's about giving people a place to feel human for an hour, no matter what they're carrying outside the door. Junho was quiet for a moment, staring down at the ring in his lap. I went there because I needed exactly that. A place to feel human. My assistant found it, said the food was good and nobody would recognize me there. I didn't expect. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at his own hospital bed, at the 4 in his hand, at the entire unraveling mess of his life. I didn't expect any of this. Do you want to talk about it? Hilda asked, then immediately second-guessed herself. Sorry, that's probably not my place. No, Junho said quickly. No, it's fine. Nobody's asked me that in longer than I can remember. Everyone around me asks about stock prices and board votes and PR statements. Nobody asks how I'm actually doing. He told her, haltingly at first, then with more urgency, like a dam breaking after years of pressure. His father had built Kong Industries from a single manufacturing plant into a global conglomerate and had died 5 years ago, leaving Junho, only 29 at the time, to inherit control of it all. His mother had died when he was 9, a car accident, and the ring had been the last gift his father ever gave her, recovered from the wreckage and kept ever since. His uncle, his father's younger brother, had never forgiven Junho's father for being chosen as heir over him, and now that the founder was gone, he'd spent years quietly building alliances on the board, waiting for the right moment to seize control. He's telling the board I'm unstable, Junho said bitterly. That my collapse proves I'm not fit to lead. That I'm just like my mother was, apparently, fragile, emotional, unfit for this kind of pressure. As if grief is a weakness. As if working myself into the ground trying to protect my father's legacy is somehow proof I don't deserve to hold it. That's not fair, Hilda said, anger flaring in her own chest on his behalf. You almost died protecting something that was never his to take. Junho looked at her, surprised by the heat in her voice. You believe that? You just met me. I believe people don't get pushed to a hospital bed for no reason, Hilda said. And I believe anyone who carries his dead mother's ring every single day for 25 years isn't unstable. He's just carrying more than most people ever will. Something shifted in Junho's face, something raw and grateful and disbelieving all at once, as though no one had defended him in years and he'd forgotten what it felt like. Stay, he said suddenly. Just a little longer. Please. Before Hilda could answer, the door burst open and a sharply dressed woman strode in, heels clicking against the floor like gunshots, her expression already twisted with disapproval as her eyes landed on Hilda. Who is this? The woman demanded, and why is she in a restricted medical suite? Park hurried in behind her, apologetic. Ms. Yuna, this is. I don't care who she is, the woman snapped. Junho, the board is convening an emergency session in 2 hours. Your uncle is pushing a vote on medical incapacity. If you're not there in person, looking strong, we lose everything. And you're in here entertaining a waitress. Hilda felt her face burn, humiliation crawling up her neck, but Junho's expression hardened into something cold and immovable. Hilda saved my life and returned something irreplaceable to me, he said evenly. You will speak to her with respect, or you will leave. The room went silent. Ms. Yuna's mouth opened, then closed, clearly unaccustomed to being corrected, but something in Junho's tone left no room for argument. Fine, she said stiffly. 2 hours, Junho. That's all we have. She turned and left, heels clicking furiously down the hallway. Park gave Hilda an apologetic look before following her out, leaving the two of them alone again in the sudden quiet. "I'm sorry about that," Junho said. "That was Yuna, my chief legal counsel. She's not wrong that I need to be there. But she's wrong about you." "It's fine," Hilda said, though her heart was still hammering. "I should probably go anyway. You have a lot to deal with." "Wait." Junho reached for her hand before she could stand, his fingers closing gently around hers. "Can I see you again? Not because of the ring. Because of this. Whatever this was, these few minutes. I haven't felt this human in months." Hilda looked down at their hands, at the strange, impossible warmth spreading through her chest despite every rational voice in her head telling her this made no sense, that men like him didn't end up with women like her, that this was a fairy tale about to collide with the brutal edges of reality. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." 2 weeks passed in a blur that Hilda still couldn't quite believe was real. Junho, discharged from the hospital against his doctor's wishes, but under strict orders to rest, had begun finding small, careful ways to see her, always quiet, always private, always laced with an urgency that told her he knew exactly how fragile this fragile, beautiful thing between them was. He'd show up at the restaurant an hour before closing, sitting in the same corner booth, waiting until her shift ended so they could talk for 20 minutes before he had to disappear again into his other life. The one with board meetings and hostile takeovers, and a legal team that watched his every move. "You could get a private chef," Hilda teased one night, wiping down the counter as he sat sipping coffee that had long gone cold. "Someone who'd cook for you in the comfort of your penthouse instead of hiding in a corner booth like a fugitive." "I don't want a private chef," Junho said. "I want this." The noise, the smell of Miss Dorothy's cornbread, the fact that nobody here treats me like I'm made of glass or gold. "I want you." Hilda's hands stilled on the counter. "Junho, I know what you're going to say," he said quietly. "That it's complicated. That I'm a billionaire and you're, you. That people will have opinions. I don't care about any of that." "You should care," Hilda said, more sharply than she intended. "Because I care. Do you know what it's like for someone like me to be seen with someone like you? People will say I'm after your money. They'll say I trapped you, manipulated you, that I'm some kind of gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. And your world, your board, your family, they'll never accept me." "Not really." "My mother wasn't from money either," Junho said quietly. "Did I tell you that? My father met her when she was a seamstress, working out of a small shop near the factory he was building. His family disowned him for marrying her. Called her exactly what you're afraid people will call you. He didn't care. He said the only opinion that mattered was hers and his own." Hilda felt something tighten in her throat. "And did it work out? Being disowned?" "They reconciled, eventually, once the company started succeeding and pride gave way to greed," Junho said, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. "But my mother never forgot how they treated her at the beginning. She used to tell me that people who love conditionally were never worth trying to please in the first place." He reached across the counter, taking Hilda's hand in his. "I'm not asking you to fix my family, Hilda. I'm asking you to let me try. Let us try." Before Hilda could answer, her phone buzzed violently against the counter. She glanced down, and her stomach dropped. A message from her sister. "Mom's back in the hospital. It's bad this time. Please come if you can." "Hilda?" Junho asked, watching her face change. "What is it?" "My mom," Hilda said, her voice cracking despite her best effort to hold it together. "She has a heart condition. We've been managing it, but it sounds like this time it's worse." She was already reaching for her coat, her hands shaking. "I need to go. I need to find a flight. I'll take care of it," Junho said immediately, standing. "No, Junho, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering." His voice was firm, steady, the voice of a man used to solving problems with resources most people couldn't imagine. He was already dialing. "My private jet can have you there in a fraction of the time a commercial flight would take. I'll also have my company's medical team consult with her doctors, get her the best possible care immediately." "Junho, that's too much, I can't." "Hilda." He took her face gently in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Let me help. Please. This is what I want to do with everything I have. Let it mean something." Tears spilled down Hilda's cheeks despite herself, and she nodded, unable to find words. Within 6 hours, Hilda was standing in a hospital corridor across the country, watching through a window as a team of specialists, flown in on Junho's dime, examined her mother with equipment the local hospital didn't have. Her sister sat beside her, disbelief written across her face. "Who is this man?" her sister whispered. "Hilda, what is going on?" "It's a long story," Hilda said, exhaustion and gratitude tangled together in her chest. Her mother stabilized within 2 days, the specialists diagnosing an issue that had been missed before, adjusting her medication in ways that finally seemed to work. When Hilda finally sat beside her mother's hospital bed, holding her hand, her mother studied her face with the particular knowing look only mothers seem to have. "There's someone," her mother said. It wasn't a question. Hilda laughed, wiping fresh tears from her eyes. "There's someone, Mama. Someone with money. Judging by how fast that helicopter got me a new specialist," her mother said dryly, and Hilda laughed harder, relief and love crashing over her in waves. "His name is Junho," Hilda said. "And Mama, he's different. He sees me. Not what I have or don't have. Me." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Then don't you dare let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of it." Back in the city, while Hilda was away, the storm Junho had been dreading finally broke. His uncle, King Sangmin, had grown tired of waiting for the board to slowly turn against his nephew through whispers and manufactured doubt. He wanted something faster, something more devastating. And when one of his informants, a junior employee eager to please, someone who'd seen Junho slipping away from headquarters at odd hours, reported the pattern of his disappearances, Sangmin had him followed. It took less than 3 days for a private investigator to produce a full report, photographs of Junho at the restaurant, at Hilda's apartment building, boarding his private jet with a young black woman who worked as a waitress. Sangmin studied the photographs with the cold, calculating satisfaction of a predator who had finally found the weak point in his prey's armor. Well, he murmured to Yuna, whom he had quietly been cultivating as an ally within Junho's inner circle for months, offering promises of a promotion once he took control. "It seems our grieving CEO has found himself a distraction. A poor, foreign, uneducated distraction, no less." "She's not stupid," Yuna said carefully, some flicker of conscience surfacing despite herself. "I met her. She's sharp." "Sharp doesn't matter," Sangmin said dismissively. "What matters is optics. What matters is a board of aging, image-conscious conservatives who already think my nephew is unstable, now discovering he's been secretly involved with a restaurant employee, a woman with no education, no status, no family connections. Nothing to offer this company but a scandal waiting to happen. This isn't just a personal embarrassment for him. This is the final nail I need." He called an emergency board session for the following week, ensuring the photographs carefully selected, carefully framed to look as scandalous and reckless as possible were leaked to select board members beforehand, planting seeds of doubt before Junho even knew the meeting's true purpose. When Hilda returned from her trip, exhausted but lighter, her mother stable and improving, she found Junho waiting for her at the airport himself, something she hadn't expected and which sent a warm rush through her chest until she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, dropping her bag. "My uncle knows about you," Junho said grimly. "He's called an emergency board meeting. He has photographs, Hilda, of us. He's going to use it against me, against you, in front of the entire board." Hilda felt the ground tilt beneath her. "What does that mean? What's going to happen?" "I don't know yet," Junho admitted, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. "But I promise you, Hilda, whatever happens, I am not going to let him make you into a scapegoat for his own greed. I need you to trust me." "I do trust you," Hilda said, though fear was already coiling tight in her stomach. "I'm just scared, Junho. Scared of what people like your uncle can do to people like me." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear despite everything crashing down around them. "Then let me be scared for both of us," he murmured into her hair. "Because I refuse to lose you the way I've lost everyone else I've loved." "Smash that like button," Drop your prediction in the comments, and subscribe now if you haven't. The boardroom was colder than Hilda expected, all glass and steel and hard, unforgiving light, the kind of room built to intimidate rather than welcome. She stood outside it in the hallway, her hands twisted together, while Junho squeezed her shoulder one last time before walking in to face the people who controlled the fate of everything his father had built. "You don't have to come in," he'd told her earlier. "You can wait, and I'll handle this." "No," Hilda had said, surprising herself with her own steadiness. "If they're going to talk about me, I want to be in the room. I refuse to be discussed like I'm not a person with a voice." So there she stood, just inside the door, at Junho's insistence, as 12 board members settled into their seats around a long mahogany table, Kung Sang-min at the far end, wearing a thin, satisfied smile that made Hilda's skin crawl. "Let's begin," Sang-min said smoothly, once the room quieted. "As many of you are aware, my nephew's recent hospitalization raised serious concerns about his fitness to continue leading this company. I had hoped those concerns would prove unfounded. Unfortunately, I've since discovered information that I believe makes those concerns far more urgent." He gestured, and an assistant distributed printed photographs to each board member, the same ones his investigator had captured Junho and Hilda at the restaurant, at her apartment, boarding the jet. "This woman," Sang-min continued, his eyes flicking coldly toward Hilda, "is a restaurant waitress with no formal education beyond high school, no family wealth, no professional standing whatsoever. My nephew has been engaged in a secret relationship with her for weeks, flying her across the country on company resources, exposing this company to potential liability, scandal, and reputational damage, all while claiming to be recovering from a medical crisis that, frankly, seems more likely to have been triggered by reckless personal decisions than boardroom pressure." Murmurs rippled around the table. Hilda felt her face burn, humiliation and fury tangling together in her chest, but she forced herself to stand tall, refusing to shrink beneath their judgmental stares. "I move," Sang-min continued, "that given the clear pattern of instability, poor judgment, and reckless personal conduct demonstrated by my nephew, this board vote to remove him as CEO, effective immediately, and appoint an interim leadership committee until a permanent replacement can be found." "That's enough," Junho said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, sharp and controlled despite the fury simmering beneath it. He stood, buttoning his jacket, and Hilda watched him transform in real time from the tired, vulnerable man she'd sat beside in a hospital bed into the formidable CEO the entire company both feared and respected. "You want to talk about poor judgment, uncle?" Junho said, his eyes never leaving Sang-min's face. "Let's talk about the fact that you've spent the last 5 years quietly poisoning relationships on this board, spreading lies about my stability, waiting like a vulture for any opportunity to seize what my father built and you were never trusted with. Let's talk about the fact that you hired a private investigator to follow me, to invade my personal life, to photograph a woman who saved my life and did nothing wrong except exist without your approval." Junho, one of the older board members, began, uncertain. "No," Junho said. "Let me finish. This woman, Hilda, found something of mine that fell during my hospitalization. Something irreplaceable. My mother's ring, the last thing my father ever gave her before she died. Hilda could have sold it. Do you have any idea what a ring like that is worth, on top of what someone might have paid for a scandal like Billionaire's lost heirloom found and sold? She could have disappeared with it and no one would have ever known. Instead, she tracked down our headquarters, insisted on returning it to me personally, and asked for nothing in return. Nothing. Not money, not publicity, not a single thing." He turned to face the rest of the board now, his voice steady and unyielding. "You want to question my judgment? My judgment led me to a woman with more integrity than anyone sitting in this room, including my own uncle, who has spent years scheming against his own family for control of a company he never built and doesn't deserve. If loving someone who has shown me nothing but honesty and kindness is instability, then I will gladly be unstable. But don't you dare sit here and pretend this is about my fitness to lead. This has always been about his greed." The room was silent, tension thick enough to choke on. Hilda's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. One of the older board members, a woman named Director Choi who had served on the board since the company's earliest days, finally spoke. Junho, may I ask the young woman a question directly? Junho glanced at Hilda, and she nodded, stepping forward despite the tremor in her legs. Of course, Hilda said. Why did you return the ring? Director Choi asked, studying her carefully. You could have sold it. Kept it. No one would have known. Why go through the trouble of tracking down this company, demanding to see him personally, when it clearly cost you time, money, and possibly your job to do so? Hilda took a breath, steadying herself. Because it wasn't mine. Because I saw a man in pain, not a billionaire, not a headline. Just a man who lost something that mattered more to him than anything money could replace. My mother raised me to believe that who you are when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain, is who you really are. I didn't return that ring because I wanted anything from Mr. King. I returned it because it was the right thing to do, and because some things matter more than money, even when you don't have very much of it yourself. Director Choi studied her for a long moment before turning to the rest of the board. I've sat on this board for over 20 years. I watched Junho's father build this company from nothing, and I watched him nearly lose everything when this board turned against his wife simply because she wasn't born into wealth. I will not make that mistake twice. I move that Kong Sang-min's proposal be rejected outright, and furthermore, given the clear evidence of his manipulation and unauthorized surveillance of a fellow executive's personal life, I move that his position on this board be formally reviewed for termination. A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. Sang-min's face went pale, then red, his composure cracking as he realized the tide had turned decisively against him. This is absurd, he sputtered. You would trust the word of a waitress over. I would trust the word of someone with integrity over yours, Sang-min, Director Choi said coldly. You've shown us exactly who you are today. The vote was swift and decisive. Sang-min's motion failed unanimously, and by the end of the session, his own position on the board was suspended pending formal review. Security quietly escorted him from the building as he shouted threats that no one bothered to listen to anymore, his years of careful scheming unraveling in a single afternoon. Junho found Hilda in the hallway afterward, pulling her into his arms without a word, holding her like he never wanted to let go. You didn't have to do that, Hilda whispered against his chest. Defend me like that, in front of everyone. I would do it 1,000 times over, Junho murmured. You have no idea how long I've waited for someone worth fighting for like that. But even as relief washed over them both, Hilda felt a flicker of unease she couldn't quite shake. Sang-min's threats, shouted as security dragged him away, echoed in her mind. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Both of you. She didn't know yet how right he'd turn out to be, at least for one more terrifying night. Kindly like, comment, subscribe, and stay right where you are, because the finale is next. 3 weeks passed in a fragile, cautious peace. With Sang-min's influence gutted and his position formally terminated by the board, Kong Industries stabilized, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Junho found himself sleeping through full nights, eating meals without his phone buzzing every few minutes with another crisis to manage. He and Hilda grew bolder, no longer hiding in corner booths after hours. He took her to dinner at restaurants where people recognized him, walked beside her through public parks without flinching at the occasional phone camera raised in their direction. The tabloids caught on quickly, of course, running headlines that ranged from breathlessly romantic to cruelly condescending, but Junho never once wavered, never once suggested she should shrink herself to make his world more comfortable. Let them talk, he told her one evening, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights spread out beneath them like scattered stars. I spent my whole life letting other people's opinions dictate how I lived. I'm done with that. Hilda leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the city breathe below them. My mother wants to meet you, she said. Officially. She's well enough to travel now, and she keeps threatening to fly out here herself if you don't come to her first. Junho laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that still caught Hilda off guard every time she heard it, so different from the exhausted, hollow man who had collapsed in front of her all those weeks ago. Then I suppose I'd better not disappoint her. He took her hand, turning to face her fully, something suddenly serious settling into his expression. Hilda, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I don't want to wait any longer to say it. Her heart began to race. Junho. When my mother died, he said quietly, I stopped believing that people stayed. My father remarried briefly when I was a teenager to a woman who left the moment she realized being married to a grieving workaholic wasn't as glamorous as she'd imagined. I watched people circle my father's wealth like sharks, watched them do the same to me the moment I took over the company. I stopped trusting that anyone wanted me, just me, without the company attached. Junho, Hilda whispered. You never once asked me for anything, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Not money, not status, not access to my world. You returned my mother's ring when you could have sold it and disappeared. You stood in that boardroom and told the truth even when it was terrifying. You flew across the country to be with your own mother without a second thought about what it might cost you, because that's who you are. You love people without conditions, Hilda. And I don't know how to tell you what that's meant to me, except to show you. He reached into his jacket pocket, and Hilda's breath caught as she recognized the small velvet box, the very one she had returned to him weeks ago. He opened it, revealing his mother's ring, the antique gold band catching the city lights. This ring is the last piece of my mother I have, he said, his voice trembling slightly. It represents everything I believed love could be before I lost her, and everything I was afraid I'd never find again after. I want you to have it, Hilda. Not as a symbol of what I can give you, but as a symbol of everything you've already given me. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Hilda's face before she could even find words, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. Junho, are you sure? This ring means so much. Are you sure you want to give it to me? I have never been more sure of anything in my life, he said. You gave it back to me once, Hilda. Now I'm giving it to you forever if you'll have it. If you'll have me. Yes, Hilda whispered, then louder, laughing through her tears. Yes, Junho, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had always been meant for her hand. He pulled her into a kiss, and for a moment, the entire chaotic, impossible journey that had brought them here, the collapse, the ring, the boardroom battle, the fear and uncertainty dissolved into simple, overwhelming joy. News of their engagement spread quickly, and while most of the public response was warm, genuinely moved by the story of the waitress who returned a billionaire's heirloom and won his heart in return, there remained pockets of cruelty online. Comments questioning her motives, mocking her background, insisting she must be some kind of manipulator who'd calculated her way into his life. Hilda tried not to let it get to her, but late one night, scrolling through her phone while Junho slept beside her, she found herself lingering on a particularly vicious thread, her chest tightening with old, familiar insecurities. You're awake, Junho murmured sleepily, noticing the light of her phone screen. What's wrong? Nothing, Hilda said quickly, setting the phone down. Just couldn't sleep. He studied her face in the dim light, seeing through her the way he always did. Show me. Reluctantly, she handed him the phone. He scrolled through the comments, his jaw tightening with each cruel word, before setting it aside entirely. Hilda, look at me, he said gently. None of these people know you. None of them know what it took for you to walk into my company's headquarters with nothing but a velvet box and more courage than half my board possesses. None of them know how you sat beside my hospital bed and asked how I was actually doing when no one else had bothered to ask in months. Their opinions don't get to define your worth. Only you get to do that. I know, Hilda said softly. It's just hard sometimes. Feeling like I have to prove I deserve this. Deserve you. You don't have to prove anything, Junho said firmly. You already have, 1,000 times over, in ways that matter far more than anything a stranger types into a comment section. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Let me ask you something. If none of this had happened, if I wasn't a CEO, if I was just an ordinary man who collapsed in that restaurant, would you have done anything differently? No, Hilda said without hesitation. I would have helped you regardless. I would have returned the ring regardless. Then that's your answer, Junho said. You didn't fall in love with my money, Hilda. You fell in love with me before you even knew how much money I had. That's not something anyone can take away from you, no matter what they type into a comment section at 2 in the morning. Hilda laughed softly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. When did you get so wise? Around the time a woman in a worn coat walked into my company and reminded me what actually matters in life, Junho said, smiling. Now come here. We have a wedding to plan, and I refuse to let internet strangers steal one more minute of sleep from either of us. The wedding planning brought its own complications, of course, merging two worlds that had never been designed to intersect. Miss Dorothy, thrilled beyond words at Hilda's happiness, insisted on catering part of the reception herself, refusing to let a fancy catering company handle everything. Hilda's mother, now fully recovered and radiant with joy, flew out weeks early to help with preparations, forming an unlikely but genuine friendship with Junho, who treated her with a warmth and respect that brought tears to Hilda's eyes more than once. Even some of the board members, particularly Director Choi, took a personal interest in the wedding, having grown fond of Hilda since the day she'd stood in that boardroom and refused to be diminished. The only shadow remained Sangmin, whose bitter, whispered threats still echoed occasionally in Hilda's mind, though months had passed without incident. She told herself it was over, that he'd lost his power, his influence, his ability to hurt them. She told herself a lot of things, right up until the night before the wedding, when everything nearly fell apart. The night before the wedding, Hilda sat in her hotel suite, surrounded by the quiet chaos of tissue paper, garment bags, and the low hum of nervous excitement, when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hilda, a voice said, smooth and cold, and it took her a moment to place it. Sangmin. Her blood ran cold. How did you get this number? I still have friends in places you wouldn't expect, Sangmin said, his tone almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. I wanted to congratulate you personally. Tomorrow's the big day, isn't it? The waitress becomes a princess. What do you want? Hilda said flatly, refusing to let her voice shake. I want you to understand something before you walk down that aisle, Sangmin said. I lost my position, my reputation, everything I spent years building, because of you. Do you think I'd simply let that go? I have information, Hilda. About your family. About your father, actually, the one who left when you were young. Interesting story there. I wonder how the press would feel about it, the night before your fairy tale wedding. Hilda's stomach twisted, old wounds she'd buried years ago suddenly exposed and raw. Her father, who had abandoned their family when she was 12, whose absence had shaped so much of her childhood struggle, was not a story she'd ever shared publicly, not even fully with Junho. You're threatening me, Hilda said, forcing steel into her voice despite the tremor in her hands. The night before my wedding. That's who you are. I'm simply giving you a choice, Sangmin said. Call off the wedding, quietly disappear from Junho's life, and I'll ensure this information never sees daylight. Or marry him tomorrow, and watch as I make sure every tabloid in the country digs into every painful corner of your past, twisting it into whatever narrative sells the most papers. Hilda's mind raced, fear and fury colliding violently in her chest. She thought about hanging up immediately, calling Junho, letting him handle this the way he'd handled the boardroom. But something in her, some deep, unshakable resolve, made her speak instead. You know what, Sangmin, she said, her voice growing steadier with each word. Go ahead. Tell them about my father. Tell them he left. Tell them I grew up poor, that my mother worked nights to keep food on our table, that I've waited tables for 2 years to survive. Tell them everything, because none of it is something to be ashamed of. It's the reason I know what really matters in life, unlike you, who's spent your entire existence chasing power you never earned and never deserved. You're bluffing, Sangmin said, though something uncertain crept into his voice. I'm not, Hilda said. Because unlike you, I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Everything I am, I built with my own hands, out of struggle you'll never understand. So publish whatever you want. It won't change the fact that tomorrow, I'm marrying a man who loves me for exactly who I am, struggles and all. And it won't change the fact that you're a bitter, lonely man who's about to watch us build a life you'll never be part of. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking as she set the phone down, adrenaline coursing through her. Within minutes, there was a knock at her door. Junho stood there, his expression tight with concern. Park just told me Sangmin's been trying to reach people connected to the wedding all evening. Are you okay? Did he contact you? Hilda's composure finally cracked, tears spilling as she nodded, and Junho pulled her into his arms immediately, holding her tightly. He threatened to expose things about my father, Hilda said, her voice muffled against his chest. About my past. I told him to go ahead. You did. Junho pulled back slightly, studying her face. I'm not ashamed of where I come from, Junho, Hilda said fiercely, wiping her tears away. I'm not going to let him make me feel small the night before I marry you. I refuse. Something fierce and proud lit up in Junho's eyes. That's exactly why I love you, he said. But you shouldn't have had to face that alone. Come on. He led her to his car, and 20 minutes later, they were standing outside Sangmin's apartment, security trailing discreetly behind them. Sangmin opened the door, his smug expression faltering slightly at the sight of them standing together, unified and unafraid. Whatever information you think you have, Junho said coldly, publish it. Go ahead. Because tomorrow, in front of everyone who matters to us, I am going to marry this woman, and no threat, no scandal, no manufactured story you dig up is going to change that. But if you contact her again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will use every legal resource this company has to ensure you never work in this industry again, and that any information you think you have about harassment tonight becomes very public information indeed. Sangmin's face paled as he glanced between them, finally recognizing the full weight of what he'd lost, not just position and power, but any remaining leverage he'd imagined he still held. This isn't over, he muttered weakly, but the threat had lost all its teeth. Yes, Junho said calmly. It is. They walked away together, Hilda's hand tightly clasped in his, and for the first time since the phone call, she felt the fear finally begin to loosen its grip on her chest. The next day dawned bright and clear, and Hilda stood at the end of the aisle in a simple, elegant gown, her mother beaming beside her. Miss Dorothy dabbing tears from her eyes in the front row alongside Director Choi and dozens of others who had come to genuinely love and respect the woman Hilda had become. Junho stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him, his own eyes glistening with emotion he no longer bothered to hide. You found something I thought I'd lost forever, he said softly, once she reached him, echoing back to the very first moment they'd truly spoken, in that hospital room weeks ago. Not just the ring. Hope. Love. The belief that people could still be good, still be honest, still choose kindness even when nothing was in it for them. You gave me something too, Hilda whispered back. You reminded me that where I come from doesn't determine where I'm allowed to go. That love doesn't check bank accounts before it decides who's worthy. They exchanged vows beneath a sky so blue it seemed almost impossibly perfect, and when Junho slipped his mother's ring back onto her finger, this time as her husband, the entire crowd erupted into joyful applause, tears streaming down faces that had followed their impossible, beautiful story from a chance collapse in a restaurant to this moment of pure, unshakable happiness. Sangmin never published anything. Whatever remained of his credibility crumbled entirely in the following months, his name fading from relevance, while Kong Industries thrived under Junho's steady leadership, with Hilda by his side, eventually opening a foundation together that provided scholarships and support for young women from backgrounds like her own, ensuring no one else would have to fight quite as hard as she did just to be seen as worthy. Miss Dorothy's restaurant became something of a local legend, the humble corner booth where a billionaire once sat waiting for his shift-working fiancée, forever marked with a small brass plaque that simply read, "Some things are worth more than money." And every year, on the anniversary of that chaotic, terrifying night when glass shattered and a stranger's life hung in the balance, Hilda and Junho returned to that same restaurant, sitting in that same booth. Remembering the moment, a small act of honesty and courage changed both their lives forever. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us telling it, let us know in the comments below. Like this video if you believe love like this still exists, subscribe for more stories just like this one, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back around. Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll see you in the next story.